Hello and welcome back to Thomas's Moustache. Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about my poetry collection of the poetry books that I own and read, but this is only going to be part 1 of 2. Before I begin though, how about I apply some mustache wax? Today I will be using Maharaja from Captain Fawcett. It's a bit chilly today again. It was quite quite warm just a couple days ago, and then suddenly it gets quite cold again. Okay, and with that done, we can begin. Now, I touched on poetry in one of my earlier videos, the poetry that I was writing, but I have not talked too much about the poetry that I'm reading. I am a big fan of reading poetry, and I have amassed a sort of collection, you could say, although I don't have as much as I would like. But nevertheless, today we are going to go through my collection, at least part 1, which is the Wordsworth Edition part of my collection. Now, I was using Book Depository to buy all of my books, and unfortunately, I just wasn't able to get enough, of course, because I was on a budget, but I did make sure that I got every single Wordsworth Edition book I could get for my poetry collection, because Wordsworth editions are very affordable, and for a guy like me who's always on a budget, affordable poetry is some of my favorite types of poetry. But also it happens to usually be the masters of the old days whose poetry can be sold more affordably. Now, don't get me wrong, of course I'm always keen and interested in reading the masters of the old days. I think everybody should read the foundations, the building blocks of poetry from the very beginning, like Homer's the Odyssey and the Iliad, and work their way to the present day to see how poetry has changed and modified. But that is one of many reasons that you should read the masters, but of course I had to get I was only on a limited budget, so essentially I'm buying more now, or last year, and less in the future, right? Because I buy more in the past, so I will buy less in the future, and then in the future I will buy more of a different genre or period of time of poetry. Now, talking about Wordsworth, the Wordsworth editions, I should say, because, of course, I have the Wordsworth poetry collection right here. But talking about Wordsworth editions, very, very affordable, no matter what size the book. I mean, I believe the William Wordsworth poetry book was practically the same price as William Blake here, which is far smaller in comparison. So that is one thing that I really liked about the Wordsworth editions. Another thing, of course, is, you really should just bulk buy. If there's a company that is publishing poetry, then it is good to bulk buy for one specific reason as well, is that then you can get it all with the same style of cover, right? Wordsworth Editions has this beautiful green color on their books, and of course my poetry bookshelf that I have in another room The entire row is just green because of their color design. And I buy all of the Wordsworth editions at the same time, I get the same cover. Now, of course, there are a few exceptions to the Wordsworth editions. Book Depository does not allow you to, I don't believe they allowed you to choose the cover. It's just you get what's available. So some of them, such as here, Christina Rossetti, J.M. Synge, and Robert Browning. Oh, and over here we have John Donne. Those are the older style of cover. I believe from perhaps a decade previous. And then they switched to the full green on the spine, I mean. But if I were to show you, let's see, where was it? Not there, sorry. Oh yeah. Robert Browning and Alfred Lord Tennyson. We have similar sort of design here where the art at the top of the spine is a similar style. On the front, we both have that lovely green color that they adapted for their more recent cover design. But the older ones had a pale bar at the bottom that the newer editions did not have. Now, if you were to go on the Wordsworth Editions website into their poetry section, you would actually see, and for the last 3 months I've been observing the change, that slowly their editions of poetry have been changing the cover design again. They have a few poetry collections that have a new cover, including Emily Dickinson, and the newest arrival, which is Dylan Thomas, which came out, I believe, at the very beginning of the year, at least it was announced, because that's the 70 years after his death, I believe. So then they can publish. I wish that I could have gotten that one at the time of Book Depository being open, but I wasn't able. Nevertheless, it has a different cover design. The new cover design, I can't say I love it as much. One main reason is because I don't like the art as much on the front. The spine has a sort of cloth pattern. It's not textured, it's still the same sort of paper that you would find on a paperback copy of a book, but it's meant to appear to be a sort of cloth. And I've seen that, especially books from the previous century, about 30 years ago. I saw many books published like that, with cloth sort of spines, or at least cloth over the spine. That was a design pattern back then. That was very popular about 30 plus years ago. I can't say that's not a big problem for me. If I had the whole collection with that, I wouldn't mind, but some of the cover designs they changed, like Emily Dickinson's, I must admit, is my least favorite change, because it's become a little bit too floral, I suppose. I don't really like that style of an image of flowers. I'll do an on-the-screen comparison. So here we have Emily Dickinson's the previous edition of Emily Dickinson's selected poetry, which is this beautiful house. I really liked it that they were all old paintings, and you got a feel for the collection in a way by looking at the cover, and you would see, okay, what kind of feeling am I going to get from this collection? The new one, a unique style of imagery relating to flowers. I can't say that gives me an Emily Dickinson feel, but to each their own, of course. Some people are probably going to much prefer the new style than the old style, but I'm a bit of a stickler. Yeah, I like it the way I like it. Other people like it the way they like it. So I think what we'll do is, I think we'll go through a few of these poetry collections that I like, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I liked about each one, and some things that I found while reading them. So I have a few examples of some things I'd like to talk about. Number one is with Wordsworth Editions, it's not like you've got W.B. Yeats it's not like you got W.B. Yeats and you can just say, okay, which group of his poems do I want to read? They offer one. As far as I know, they don't change it. So, for example, W.B. Yeats here, this is the collected poems of W.B. Yeats. Christina Rossetti, you have selected poems of Christina Rossetti. And then J.M. Synge, you have the complete works of J.M. Synge. As well, you have, let's see here, like Robert Browning would be the poems of Robert Browning. So sometimes perhaps a poet's work is just too immense, or perhaps they particularly wanted to choose a selection of their own poems to group together. But you don't get to choose. That's what there is. Other publishers may have a different selection, I'm not entirely sure. So here I have a nice selection from my selection of Wordsworth Edition books that I would like to bring some things that I liked about each to your attention. Number one, J.M. Synge. The vast majority of this book is his plays that he wrote. Let's see, we've got The Shadow of the Glen, Riders to the Sea, The Well of the Saints, The Playboy of the Western World, The Tinker's Wedding, Deirdre of the Sorrows, probably pronouncing that incorrectly. He has some prose as well. These are long. I jokingly refer to them as just very long essays that he essentially wrote about certain areas of Ireland. Now, when I was reading it, I thought, not sure if I'm quite in the mood to read some plays and long explanations of areas of Ireland. And then there's about 10 pages of poetry. But I must tell you that I was very surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Now, I've spent a reasonable amount of time in Ireland, and I've been to many of the areas that he actually wrote about. And there is a great new appreciation for Ireland after reading J.M. Synge, which is shocking to me. Every book that I've read, I've had a new appreciation. So J.M. Synge as well, those 10 pages of poetry, I thought every one of them was exceptional. His plays are interesting. I can't say it's my favorite play in the world, but after reading his prose, which in my mind is just an extended written work detailing life in certain areas of Ireland, you can actually see his inspiration for many of the things that he actually wrote about in his plays. Next, I think we'll talk about the collected poems of Thomas Hardy and the collected poems of Rudyard Kipling. These are both reasonably similar in size, about, 850 pages each. Practically all of it is poetry, if not all of it is poetry. One thing I found was with Rudyard Kipling, he uses a lot of jargon and a lot of unique phrasing and word selection, especially since he often writes about matters pertaining to India. So he uses a lot of words which have meaning in India that he, of course, explains, or the book explains to you. But I did find that, Rudyard Kipling's poetry is not exactly my favorite of all the poetry I've read. It's extremely dense. It takes a long time to digest this poetry. Not to say that I don't like it, but Thomas Hardy's collection, I found I was able to read this incredibly quickly. Because his poetry, you just start reading and you lose track of time. It's so gentle to read. There's nothing that's going to take you out of the poetry to check, what's that word mean? What is this referring to? But Rudyard Kipling's is incredibly intelligent, but that is one thing I found, that two similar sized poetry collections, but different rates in which I could read them. I had to read only a few Rudyard Kipling poems at a time before I had to stop and consider what I was reading. Now, Lord Byron is a good one. This is a large book, but the bulk of it is actually his master work, I would say, Don Juan. He also had, the book had certain parts from Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which it wasn't the whole one. I believe they took bits and pieces of it to show you the substance, essentially. But Don Juan here is gigantic. It's 17 cantos, I believe it was. Unfinished, of course. But a very unique story. And then at the back there is some satire and poetry. His satire was quite entertaining. That is a different subject altogether, but for that you get his masterwork, his super long poem. I believe I only found one instance where the rhyming lines did not exactly rhyme, but in general I would say that it is perfect form, and there were many parts of it that I quite enjoyed. Now, William Blake, I quite like this collection here. The collection has some variety of poetry in it. It's pretty reasonable what you're going to get from a poetry collection like this, but about halfway into the collection we get into quite a curious sort of thing that you can see happen from the beginning of his new style to the end, where he creates a sort of universe of characters and situations, kind of similar to, in a way, similar to the idea of what Marvel did with their superhero movies, right? Where every hero gets a movie, but then sometimes you'll get a movie with multiple heroes from different movies and not genres, but movie worlds come together into another movie and interact with each other. And William Blake actually did something very much like that, where some of his stories give you some background, some of his stories go back in time, some of his stories go to a different place. But the characters, oftentimes you see the same characters come together in different groupings and selections of characters. So when I was reading William Blake, at first I wondered, would I really enjoy this? But it got to a point where I couldn't put it down. I just had to know what happened next with these characters. So I'd say that was a surprise to me about how excellent that was. So that will conclude my part one of my poetry book collection that I read, not write, the poetry that I'm reading. I hope you enjoyed it. It's basically just all my Wordsworth Edition books, but I know I couldn't go into huge detail about every single book because that would take a very long time and you'd perhaps get bored. But I chose a certain selection that I wanted to show you because these are poetry collections that I really did find to have interesting qualities, that as I was reading them I found, oh, I've never seen that before. I do want to end with one thing, is Wordsworth Editions has an incredible introduction section about each poet, which I believe you would find incredibly, what would be a good word, helpful. Sometimes they can be very long. I believe even the one for just Shelley was about 50 pages or something, the introduction alone, so I think that you would find it helpful. It gives you a lot of background that even an experienced reader may find useful. But each one, I do believe, in fact, I'm just doubting myself, I'm rather sure, they are written by different people. That is a good thing in a sense, because no one can be an expert of everybody on their own. Oftentimes people are experts of their own individual poet that they're interested in. Sorry about that, the dog barks at anybody who goes by. So I hope you enjoyed, and stick around for the next video, which will be my part 2 of my poetry collection of books I read. Until next time, I'll say toodaloo.